Installing the first barn door I ever did went pretty well except for this one issue. This makes you assume that the rail is not level, but it was. The problem ended up being a draft from an air conditioner vent in the bathroom and some hypersensitive wheels that were a part of the barn door hardware. The solution was magnets mounted in wood blocks to hold the door closed and open when it was supposed to be. A good number of people have watched the video and found that idea to be helpful. On my second barn door project, I had no issues at all with the hardware. The only thing that happened out of the ordinary was in the shop, and I was cutting up build-up pieces for the door itself when my table saw blade created a puff of smoke as the wood during the cut pinched in on the blade. There was no kickback on this, but there sure could have been. A few years have come and gone since these projects and lots of single barn installs, but in this video I want to talk about a double barn door build which reminded Ryan and me that at a minimum, double doors can also double the issues you might run into during installation. I thought hanging these barn doors was going to be quick and easy because our original test fit of the doors before we painted them went off without a hitch. The tops of the doors lined up great and the reveal in the center line of the barn doors was perfect. The doors seemed to be level and had no drift from side to side, so I figured if we were careful in taking off the hardware when we got back to the shop and replaced the wheels back on the same locations on the door after painting, everything would go back in place again perfectly. Unfortunately, that did not happen, so it took Ryan and I a couple of hours to get all the adjustments made on the doors and finishing touches on to where we were satisfied. And when I explained to the homeowner what we were concerned about and wanting her to understand what was going on with the alignment and the intricacies there, her response to me was, "Rusty, you're just too picky." It's kind of hard to argue with a customer who tells you something like that. The backstory on our work for this customer is that we did a couple of major bathroom remodels for her, as well as some other work in the last couple of years. I have a link to a playlist in the corner of the 5 videos we did on projects for her. You should check them out if you want to see explanations of a variety of remodeling topics on a typical home. She went beyond that initial work in her home to completely redesign her kitchen, dining, entry, utility room, and living room areas in the past year. The only piece of work we did for her on that project is these barn doors. The contractors framed the walls for the utility room with solid headers buried behind the sheetrock in order to allow me to run lag bolts for the rail for the barn doors directly into the headers and not have to put a header board on the exterior wall. That works well unless you happen to hit a joint in between the studs and the headers. 2 of my lag bolts actually did that, which caused the lag bolts not to bite into the wood as well as I wanted. So I added wood glue and wood plugs to the holes to give the lag bolts something more to grab to, and that worked out just fine. On custom projects like this, we build the doors from scratch. We're matching a style of door we built in the master bath and bedroom on earlier projects in this home. But in those cases, we stained and applied a satin finish on those doors that were built out of alder hardwood. Since we're painting these doors, I prefer to use poplar hardwood because I like its characteristics for use with a painted finish. The old carpenters I learned so many things from so many years ago would put a fresh coat of paste wax on their table saw every day before they began work. I don't treat our saw quite that well, but it's a good habit to be in when you're working with material like I'm using on these doors and you want the material to slide smoothly over your saw. Reducing the friction between the material and the saw makes all the difference in the world to cut materials accurately. I originally picked up 1 3/4 inch poplar from the lumberyard without thinking through my dimensions all that well. I realized when I got back to the shop that we build these types of interior doors to 1 3/8 inch thickness. Since my stiles and rails around the door were only 5 inches wide, I was able to make 2 passes through the table saw to reduce the thickness to the 1 3/8 inch needed. That also gives me some 1/4 inch thick material for building boxes and other small projects out of, so that was a good mistake. I'm putting another video link to the barn doors we built earlier on this job that are stained and finished. That is just to show you that there is probably a little different approach that Ryan took in building those doors for that project than what I'm doing here. The style of doors are called shaker style and are really pretty easy to build. Rather than using a router to cut dados in my perimeter pieces, I'm doing this on the table saw. Anytime you're doing something like making unusual cuts using the table saw, my major recommendation would be to be aware of the need to protect yourself. And to do that, you want your material to be under control all the time as it's running over the saw blade. I accomplish that by setting up jigs and clamps to support the pieces I'm cutting to allow me to make the movements to get the cut complete as simply and straightforwardly as possible. With this setup, the main thing I'm concentrating on is to place the material over the saw blade at a certain point and push it to another certain point and then lift it off the saw blade. Since I'm cutting a 3/4 inch wide dado for the inside panel of the doors, I need to make multiple adjustments to the position of the table saw fence in order to finish those cuts. If you're not real experienced with the table saw, you kind of need to work your way up to doing something like this. And as I said earlier, the dados could certainly be cut in the perimeter pieces of the doors with a router. The router is safer to use in cases like this, and it generates a lot of cuttings and generally makes a bigger mess, and so that's why I defaulted to using the table saw. I'm making use of a very cool tool called a domino cutter by Festool to build the doors. And by the way, I'm not sponsored in any way by Festool. I bought it a number of years ago to make some exterior wood gates for a client. It's an expensive tool, and I have to acknowledge that up front. But for projects that would need strong mortise and tenon type joints like the corners of these doors, I don't see how you can beat the Festool domino cutter for speed and strength. I'm showing this because I have the tool and it is fast and easy and great technology. If I didn't have it, I could do this in a number of other ways, including making mortise and tenon joints, which is very tedious and requires a lot of technique and skill, really. These days, with some of the timber framing lag bolts that are available, I might even try boring holes from the outside and using some of those lag bolts to tie the corners together and then plug the holes. Anyway, there are lots of ways to do this, and the domino cutter is just my preference since I have it. I also glue up my interior panels using the domino cutter as well, with a smaller bit and smaller dominoes. The primary purpose of this is to keep the lateral alignment good of the individual wood pieces that make up the panel. That saves me a lot of sanding and keeps the piece very uniform overall. Biscuit joiners and dowels work well also, but the domino cutter makes extremely quick work of this task. By the way, if you're curious about the carts that I'm working off of here in this video and wondering where they came from, I cut up our main shop cart a few months back and converted the one into two L-shaped carts that we are finding to be so useful. I did a video on this process and linked it above where I go through the reasoning and rationale for doing it. If you have a shop or garage or are intending to have a usable workspace someday, you really should take a look at this video from the standpoint of how to make better use of your functional space. I like to install the barn door hardware before I paint or finish the doors, particularly if I'm not in a big hurry on the job. The rails can be installed with a 4-foot level ideally, or even a smaller level, and still get good results. We have a laser that we use for projects like this, as well as setting tile. That comes in handy to get a good level line and as good an opportunity as possible to hang the doors perfectly level. As I said in the beginning of the video, this part of the process went great. Since there are a lot of alignment variables, especially with hanging two barn doors, I like to be able to hang them in as close to their final position as possible and see if there are adjustments that need to be made to the dimensions of the doors before the final finish gets put on them. For example, if the vertical alignment of the doors looks great and there are no gaps where the doors met in the middle, but at the top of the doors there's a little difference in height between the two. I can easily mark one door to take a 1/16 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch off to make the top alignment exact before any paint is applied. Anyway, this pre-fit step helps identify any issues like that before the paint and final finishes are put on the doors. We ran into a little bit of a problem lining up everything after reinstalling the wheels during the final installation. Following quite a bit of trial and error, we zeroed in on the culprit that was keeping us from matching our easy door alignment during our pre-installation. In the end, we just needed the holes in this bracket to be enlarged a fraction to give us a little more room to adjust the up and down position in order to get our door alignment right. A 30-minute job turned into a couple of hours because it seemed like everything we were doing took twice as long as it should have. Sometimes it just works out that way. Both Ryan and I could feel the frustration and irritation knowing that we were in one of those cycles. On the bright side, here's a neat feature on the doors that you may not have noticed. These black spots on the edge of the doors are actually magnets that are recessed into the wood so they rest a little bit below the surface of the door edge. The magnets will pull the doors together when they get within about 2 inches of each other, so the doors will stay closed when you close them, and you don't have to worry about the doors drifting apart for any reason. That's just a neat little add-on feature. The final touches involve adding bumpers to the tops of the doors that keep the door from jumping off the track unintentionally. We install these guides at the floor level that travel back and forth in a slot cut with a router at the bottom of the doors. That keeps the doors from swinging away from the wall as they're being opened and closed. In the end, this is a real nice looking set of doors. I want to give you an invitation to consider something I'm experimenting with. Some people who ask detailed questions about things in my videos in the YouTube comments section, I've been inviting to ask questions directly of me through an app we're making use of. The details of that are in the description below, and I'm guessing that if you're someone who has watched to the complete end of this video, you likely might be someone we would also enjoy having become a part of that group. So check out the link if you're interested, and be sure to jump back here to the end to check out other videos that we think you may like also. As always, thanks for watching.